Welcome to The Beautiful Side of Grief, your go-to podcast if you're wanting to hear from people who have moved through heart-wrenching loss or those who are at the coalface supporting the process. It's diverse, heartwarming, though most of all it is positive and filled with go-tos that you can use yourself. I'm your host, Helen Morris, and I'm a health professional turned energy healing practitioner after I lost my only child and daughter, Tal, in a car accident in 2017. I want to use my own unique experience with loss to help you navigate your journey. You will hear from grief coaches, mediums, authors, first-hand loss accounts, plus many, many more. I'll put the links to any free resources in the episode notes. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you can keep informed of each weekly episode. So now grab a pen and paper if you want to jot things down. Sit back and relax as we navigate the beautiful sides of grief. My guest today is Michele Thomson, and as soon as you start speaking to Michele, you know she has not only the biggest heart, she also has a passion to create more healthy workplaces. The key aim? To have shared values that lead employees to feel valued, and in return, they create great customer experiences. And who doesn't want a good experience in the health sector? I ask you that. This Canadian has a nursing background of over 25 years, specializing in gerontology. And during that time, Michele has also worked extensively with First Nations throughout British Columbia. Though what we are chatting with Michele about today are her early experiences in palliative care and long-term care facilities and her key learnings around improving the grief experience, where at the tender age of 23, she had to be dealing and supporting people of a similar age through their final days of life. You have to have a calling not only to do that, but to do that well. My thanks to you for listening in today. I'm sending you much love if you've lost someone treasured in your life, and let's help you find your way through that. Michele, such a pleasure to have you with me on the beautiful side of grief today. You know, look, you've got such a huge heart full of wonderful compassion, and I know everything that you touch is for the benefit of others. And so I am so grateful to have you on the episode today and talking with you.
Thank you so much, Helen. I'm really happy to be here. I've really been looking forward to our time together today.
Now, let's start with, just how you got into this all. I don't know about you, but I think life was leading us to our destinies, and that seemed to be the case with you when you first graduated from nursing. And the situation that you were in at the time where there was a surplus of nurses. So you didn't end up going with what you thought you were going to move into. You ended up moving into palliative care. And for me, knowing about palliative care and what that involves, that was such a huge move for somebody who was so young, straight out of nursing, to head into. So tell us about that time, that journey, and what palliative care looked like for you at that time.
Yeah, thank you. I certainly agree with you. I do believe that the universe has a way of leading us to where we want to be, and that's not always clear at the beginning of the journey. And when I first graduated, so I'm joining you from Canada, and when I first graduated, there wasn't a lot of work in the hospital for me, which is where, you think you're going to end up when you graduate. It's kind of the sexy place that everybody wants to go work. And I needed to work. I had just moved across the country and I had bills to pay. And so I went into community care, or what we call home care at the time. And I ended up being asked to lead a palliative care team for a home care organization. And at that time, most of my patients were HIV positive patients that were my age, which was not something I had ever experienced before. Now, I had experienced death, not a lot of it. I had only lost my grandmother at that point, and I had experienced some death while I was a nursing student. But that was the first time I had been confronted with caring for people that were my age, that were, dying. And I really felt that at that time, I just wasn't prepared to support them in the way that I wanted to from a nursing perspective, because I didn't know how to sit with my own discomfort over their death, to be able to hold the space for them in a really effective and professional and, just empathetic way. And so at that point, I think it was a turning shift for me in my personal career to really do a deep dive into death and dying and palliative care. And it really became an area of focus for me where I hate to say it's a passion and something that I love. I find people find that an odd comment to say when you're talking about death, but I really do. It is a passion. And I just could talk about it all day long, because I just think it is something we don't talk enough about. And I have had so many wonderful experiences with the clients that I've helped to be on their journey at the end of their life. So yeah, it's been a wonderful journey for me.
So I can completely understand when you use the word passion, but I also get the other side of it where you think, gosh, that doesn't go with death and dying and that so easily. But, when you love doing what you do, when you love helping people on their journey, that is where the passion comes in. And that is what epitomizes you really, because, not only were you dealing with these young people who were the same age of you, did you have much sort of support or training in that area when you first moved into it? Like, did somebody guide you through that whole palliative care process?
No, I mean, I certainly knew about, physiologically what the body goes through having, being a nurse. I would certainly knew what to expect from that perspective. But in terms of really being a palliative nurse or an end of life comfort care nurse, I had no idea how to show up well for not only my patients, but their family members who were also going through, the spectrum of grief, anger, you go through all of those emotions often in succession and very rapidly, depending on the situation. And so the only experience I had was while I was in nursing school, and I was in maternal newborn doing one of my placements there. I said this to you before, that working on a maternal newborn floor in the hospital is the happiest place to work until something really awful goes wrong, and then nobody wants to be there. And I unfortunately was working one evening when a brand new mom, first baby, came in, and complications ensued, and she ended up giving birth to a child that did not survive more than a few moments once he was born. And as a skill, I was asked to prepare this poor little infant for aftercare. And so I remember finding myself in a utility room with this, newborn baby in front of me and sobbing and not really knowing how to deal with that. And then subsequently watching that poor mother go home 2 days later with a plant in her lap where a baby should have been. And again, not knowing, avoiding her and not being able to make eye contact with her because they didn't know what to say to her. What could you say to her to make her feel better? And I think that experience helped me prepare for the experience that I just shared once I, got into palliative care. But it also reminded me that I really wanted to make sure that I showed up in the best possible way to create the best experience for not only my patient who was dying, but also for their family members.
Yeah, kudos to you, because you're obviously a natural leader and have gravitated to these roles very early in your career. And this led you, wanting to do the best, also led you to developing a palliative toolkit, didn't it? So what types of things did this toolkit cover to help others?
Yeah, so excuse me, in long-term care where I currently work, and I have been working for over 16 years, one of the gaps that we've identified as fairly consistent across kind of all homes is the ability for families to access resources and information when there has been a noticeable decline, or we know that where we can see that there's been decline where death is likely forthcoming, and how to support families, or when they're coming in and somebody is actively dying, how do we support them when they're in the home? And so we created what we called a butterfly cart in one of our homes for families that had books and different resources for them to read about what happens at end of life, what happens with the body, but also just some spiritual pieces for them to try to work through. We also included activities in there for younger children or grandchildren that may have been visiting. And then really just comfort pieces for families who were sitting. So we always had tea and coffee available for them, and some, hygiene products if they wanted to go brush their teeth, and deodorant and all those kinds of things to make them comfortable while they were, staying with us. And, we had videos at the time. We still had DVDs and VHS tapes. And so we had those available so that families could watch that and just try to prepare them, and then ask the questions, while you've been reading through anything, has anything come up for you that you need some help with understanding? Is there anything we can do or provide for you? And it really just helps to keep the conversation going and help us help them prepare.
That's such a wonderful idea. And it is the little things that make the difference. I know that when we had an elderly relative pass away, and we were there, much, much longer than expected. And it was just being able to go and brush your teeth and wash your face that made such a big, big difference, because it just set you up ready for the next round, so to speak, so that you felt ready and prepared. And I do believe it does come down to those details. And I think it's just like raising children. We just somehow expected to know how to deal with somebody who's dying or passing away. And we don't have that roadmap. We don't know how it's supposed to look like. And so that is such a great toolkit. So
yeah, and I think that sometimes in long-term care, when someone is their life is coming to an end at that stage, people dismiss some of the heartache and confusion that people have, because it's like, well, it's a natural part of death or life. They're all going to die at some point. And so I think the grief that people experience or the confusion isn't given the same weight as maybe when a younger person or someone who is dying of a terminal illness, or where there's a sudden death occurs. It's not provided that same level of, I think, respect. I like to use the word respect. And we're trying to change that, because grief is grief. It doesn't matter when it happens or how it comes. It is what it is. And whether you're, an adult child or a wife or someone who's much younger, the death of someone who either birthed you or who you love incredibly is painful. And it doesn't matter whether you're expecting it or not. You don't always show up in the ways that you think you're going to show up. And I experienced that with the loss of my own grandmother, and watching my mother as her caretaker go through that, and not being able to make very difficult decisions that we had talked about, and we knew that's what she wanted, and my mom was not able to make those decisions, and I had to step in and support her with that. So I think it's just something that we try to talk to our families all about, and let them know that just because this person is at the end stage of their life and they've lived a full and rich life doesn't mean that you don't get to grieve in the same way as other people.
Yeah, great points. We're going to get on to talking about making those decisions in a little bit. But first of all, I want just to hear from you about how you can make the dying experience something that patients and families are not afraid of. How did that look for you in the homes and families you were visiting?
Yeah, so I think that's one of the fundamental differences between long-term care and when I had patients that were dying at home is the one thing that's the commonality is that the person who's dying is always the one driving the ship or steering the car, whatever analogy you want to use. We're really taking their lead in terms of what their death looks like, and whether that's playing certain music or being close to an open window or, temperature in the room, whatever it is, we're doing everything we can to honor what that will look like for them. I think that in the home, though, often the circumstances of the person's death was very different than you would say within long-term care, where the person has kind of reached an older age and it's a natural part of the life cycle. And so I would often spend the first few visits really just allowing the family to know who I was and introducing myself so that they felt comfortable with me providing such intimate care to their loved one at this point. And often just turning on the kettle and sitting down and having a cup of tea. But I was also very cognizant of trying to not make it become a medical environment and a very sterile environment where if the person had pain pumps, I would be hiding those pumps under a blanket, or trying to keep, equipment that I needed away or tucked into a closet so that wasn't overwhelming and became very scary for families. I believe, and what families often told me is that where I think I offered the greatest support was really not only keeping them informed, but trying to stay one step ahead of where we were going so that they knew what to expect. So when it happened, it wasn't a surprise. So, at the end, we do sometimes see people develop some additional fluid, and that can sound very distressing, like they're choking or they're not able to get their breath, or they will start to chain stoke where, a part of their brain is being impacted. And so their breathing can become very erratic, or there's long stretches between breaths. And so it was really just preparing the families that at each step, what to expect next so that they would be aware of that and it would be a little less scary for them.
Yeah, I feel like making people feel very safe, allows them to trust the process that you're introducing them to and giving such valuable information because like you say, you don't know what you don't know. So you're never quite sure how that person is going to, choose to leave. And yeah, so just being able to have somebody that says, this is okay, this is just part of it, and helping to explain what's happening around that is like a huge comfort, a huge relief, even though it may be, not the greatest thing to experience. And I think that makes a big difference. So let's just compare that with somebody who's in an aged care facility where they're nearing the end of their life and it's a natural progression. Do you feel that we still need to have those same sorts of conversations? Because I think sometimes suddenly that comes upon us that, this person suddenly taking a turn, maybe something's happened. They may have caught, pneumonia or something like that. And suddenly people are plunged into that. Do you think that we still need to approach it in the same way, really help people understand what that progression is going to look like?
Yeah, I think that when, people are dying at home or, if they're younger, they have had generally conversations with family members about what that is going to look like. And there's been some conversation about that because there really needs to be. I mean, there's no escaping that. When someone's in long-term care, I think that it's often a conversation that gets put off and put off and put off until it's too late to have that conversation, whereby the person may have cognitive decline or dementia, Alzheimer's, or other chronic diseases that make it really difficult for the person to identify what their dying experience will look like. And it really leaves families in a difficult situation of guessing and playing a guessing game about what that will look like for family members. And that can be incredibly distressing for family members because, my experience has been that a lot of family members who are making those decisions feel that it is exactly that. Like, I don't want to make the decision to say, don't do any aggressive measures to keep my loved one alive. And the conversations that we've really been having over the years with families is to remind them that we're really going back to that place of having them ask themselves, if your mother or father, for example, were able to make a decision right now, what they would want, what do you think they would say?
Yes.
And when they can bring it back to that, then we can start the conversation about saying, then you're not really making a decision. You're really honoring the wishes of your loved one who can no longer make that or voice that decision on their own behalf. And so it takes an incredible amount of relief away and pressure away from that family where you can literally see them take a deep breath and sigh that relief, where they no longer are carrying this weight of this decision. It's really now a place of honor and love and respect that we are now being able to move forward. And that will happen in both cases by really meeting people where they're at and understanding what conversations have happened to this point. Have you talked about it? And really trying to ask those questions, but meeting people where they're at in terms of the information that they have, and then working together to come up with a plan.
Yeah, Yeah, such good information. And I'm a huge, believer and advocate of people having conversations early about this. Don't wait until something happens. You never know what is around the corner. So, you were dealing with people who were your age and you were only in your sort of 20s then. So, those conversations still need to happen at a very young age because nobody knows. So, yeah, great to have those conversations. Now, you mentioned, about people feeling guilt and being able to release that or ease that guilt from making decisions. Because I hear of a lot of people that are left after somebody has died with that feeling of guilt and with a lot of feelings, resentful, guilt. But the one that I'm interested in is a lot of people feel this anger about what is happening. And I know that when you were doing home care, a lot of families were feeling this anger, perhaps because they were too young for this to be happening. What creates that anger and how do you deal with it?
Well, for my patients, I found a lot of the anger, particularly in home care, because of their diagnosis, came from the fact that they had often contracted this illness by no fault of their own. And
Yeah.
it was often not because they were promiscuous or doing things that put them at a higher risk category. It was in many cases from a partner who, was, going outside of the relationship and they didn't know about it. And so, there was a lot of anger and resentment for those reasons that they now found themselves in a position where they had no control over their destiny. And they felt robbed. They were young and felt they were never going to obviously experience getting married, having a child, and all of the things that we all dream about when we're, growing up, and that was being taken from them. And, subsequently, I think in some cases where it was maybe a middle-aged person and they had, let's say, received the diagnosis of cancer or another terminal illness, it was often the spouse that was feeling difficult or feeling angry and challenged with some of the feelings that they had because they had been their caregiver for a period of time. And so when this person passes, they felt they were going to lose their identity and didn't know what their purpose was going to be after that person was gone, or how dare you leave me? Like, when we got married, this is not what I signed up for. And really struggled, I think, with feeling angry towards someone who was dying. Like, they were like, this, like, how I shouldn't be angry at someone I love. And sitting down with them and allowing them to just open up the welcome mat for those feelings and sit with it for a bit, because it is natural to feel all of those feelings. And when you give people permission to allow those feelings to come in, I find they move through much more quickly and they can get to a place where they feel centered and aligned and more prepared to deal with what's going to come next, and less sitting in that chaos of those feelings of just not knowing where to turn next.
Yes, because I imagine it must be a dreadful feeling to know that the last weeks or months that you spent with somebody were around anger. You were feeling so much anger. So it's much nicer to be able to move through that, to deal with that, to understand where that's coming from, and then just to have those really nice special times where you actually are holding the space to be able to say goodbye in the way that you want to that loved person.
Yeah, and I think that that's a hard place for some people to imagine they will get to, where some of the best conversations that you can have with a person who is dying is during that time when they're dying, and they like to reminisce and talk about what was and what could have been, but also
Yeah.
just to give blessings of, I want you to go on and lead a rich and full life. And I think there's a lot of important things that people who are dying want to say and are often not given the opportunity to say those, because they are still consoling and comforting the people around them that are grieving when they know they'll be gone. And they have a lot of things to say and they want to share. And I think that when you can be open to that, some of the best conversations I have seen family members have is in those last few days and hours of a person's life.
My mum died at a very young age, and so I was just in my very early 20s when that happened. And, I was the youngest of five, and so very much at the end of the chain as far as any decision making or even anybody listening to what I had to say in that space. And, and I really felt left out of it. And I remember getting a job offer in the Caribbean, to go and work in the Caribbean aboard a charter boat. And I went, wow, but then on the other hand, I knew my mum was very unwell. At that stage, I didn't know terminal, but I knew very, very unwell. And so we had a conversation about me receiving this job offer and then being able to, whether I should take it or not, basically. And what she said to me was that, look, my life is what it is at this moment, and you still have your whole life to live. And this is one of those once in a lifetime opportunities, especially from New Zealand. You didn't get offered jobs in the Caribbean very often. And so she said, I think you need to just go and live and go and do that with my blessing. And that was really, really important for me to hear and have that conversation because, she did actually die while I was overseas, and totally unexpectedly. Every time I spoke to her, which was every week when I was in an island with a phone, we would talk, and she never let on. She never let on how much she was deteriorating, because that's the space she wanted me to be in. And so, yeah, but how grateful I am that I had that conversation and that I knew that those were her wishes. So that's just something that came up for me as you were speaking about that and the importance of those conversations. Now, I know we've touched on patient wishes, briefly, but I think we still need to understand, because I know family dynamics. I know there are people that just want to take control and sort it out and do what they believe is the best thing for this person who's unwell, and perhaps sometimes take over and start controlling it. But I think it's really, really important for that person's voice to be heard in that equation, and that their wishes be known and be carried out. So are you able just to have a chat with us now about why that is so important?
Yeah, well, I think the most important thing is that it erases any question about what death is going to look like for that person. If you've already had that conversation, it should be no surprise how it will look, and some of the steps that will need to be taken. And those are often the best experiences for everybody, is when those conversations have happened, because there is no anguishing over trying to make a decision. And sometimes those conversations I spoke about earlier don't even need to happen, because families feel quite at peace and comfortable making a decision, saying, I know I've had many conversations with my mother, and I know that this is not what she wants. So I feel very comfortable saying, no, we're not going to accept these services. I think that it's again, where those conversations have not happened is where it's most challenging. And so what we will do is, where those conversations have not happened, we will try our best to ask the individual, where we can, what it looks like for them. Because I think that sometimes, again, people will try to create a dying experience for their loved ones as opposed to what they want for themselves. And so when families ask, they won't always provide truly what they want, and they will tell us we're not family members. And so
Yes.
we tried to do that, and then work with and support our family members in saying, these are some of the conversations we've had. Does this sound like this would be maybe a good idea? Your mom shared this with me the other day. How would this resonate for you and the family? And there are some cases where there may be one or two family members that are not in agreement with the rest of the family, or who, maybe have visited more often than others, or not at all, and have a different take. And that can be difficult for everybody. Those are often very difficult family meetings. But again, I think for us, it's always going back to, what would this person want if they were in the room right now and able to make those decisions? And that's why, again, I always stress to have the conversations while you're able, because part of the grief process also for some of our families in long-term care is that they didn't have some of these conversations. And at the end, they feel that they've kind of been, ripped off, for lack of a better term, that they haven't now been able to have some of these conversations, these heartfelt conversations with their loved one, because of the disease process makes it impossible for them to do that. And they really have a lot of regret that they could go back and wish that they could have had some of those conversations. And, as we know, it's too late at that point. So, I think that it's always important to try to do that. I've created a toolkit, which I can make available if that will be helpful for some people. And it's it's some conversation starters about what that would look like for the individual.
That would be awesome. I'm sure there's people who are listening who would love that guidance in that, because I think we have to understand is what we're wanting for ourselves, or is it for that person who's experiencing that end of life situation? And because, we may be wanting all the heroic measures for us to keep them here with us, to just have that bit more time with them. Yet, it may be that they need to or want to just go because they've fought the battle long enough for them and they're ready. And I think those conversations are so vital. Yes. So that toolkit would be fantastic. So
I think, to your point, Helen, too, a lot of people at the end of, at the end of their life, and by that I mean spectrum, in that they're, aged, they're ready to go. They're tired. Their friends, they've seen a lot of loss in their life. A lot of their friends or their spouses and partners, they've been alone often for years. I know, my grandmother was in that. She lost my grandfather when my mom, who's the youngest of three girls, was only 16. She was a woman in her 50s and never remarried, because you don't. She was truly till death do us part. And I was her caregiver for the last 12 weeks of her life. And, I just remember that she wasn't verbal at that time. And we just wanted to let her do whatever she wanted to do. And she would often, clench her teeth closed tight when we would try to offer her food. And it was so troubling for my mother, the thought of her mother starving. And I said, Grandma's telling us that this is the one thing she has control over, Mom. Don't take that away from her. She knows that this is going to help her on her journey. We need to just honor that and keep her comfortable. Always, comfort measures is always paramount, not just for me as a caregiver, but also, as a nurse and a professional, is we're always focusing on comfort being the priority, and, just allowing that person to have that journey be their own and giving them permission to let go.
And I think around that also is, what we've touched on is about understanding those life stories and sharing those in that final time, so that it's a pleasurable, it's going back to memories and understanding and knowing that when they were young, what life was like. And it's just say, I've lived a good life. This has been a fantastic life. And it's for people to have known those life stories as well, because like you say, once they've gone, you don't get a chance to go back and ask them about those things that you wished you had asked them, or you wished you had known about. So I really like that, respecting and honoring, those wishes and understanding that person. You made a really good point, and I want to come back to that, because you said you are a nurse. And even when you're in your 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, you will always remain a nurse. And that's
I joke about that in long-term care now, because I apologize to all of our nurses and care aides now, because I tell them, like, you're going to be the ones caring for me potentially when I'm older. And I apologize, because I know I'm going to be a handful, because I'm stubborn now, and I'm a bit of a free spirit, and I hate wearing shoes when I'm outside. I like my feet to be touching the earth, and I know I'm going to be walking around barefoot. I will likely be a high fall risk, and I'm probably going to still think that I'm running the show and I'm a nurse, and I'll be bossy, and I'll be bossing everybody around. And that spirit of who you are at the core never goes away. And we tell families that even when their loved one has lost the ability to speak or express themselves, we never forget what it feels like to have our hand held by someone who loves us deeply and unconditionally. We know what faces are from people who have always been kind to us. That person might not remember it's their daughter or their son or their husband, but they know that this is somebody who treats them with kindness and respect and makes them feel safe when they're there. And you can still have meaningful experiences with someone at the very end who has lost some of those expressive capabilities, and know that at the core, they're still there.
Yes. What's number one thing that you'd like families to know about end of life and end of life care?
That it can be a release for a lot of people, and a really beautiful experience when you can be open. I know I said this to you before, but I get asked a lot, isn't it exhausting or difficult to be around death all the time? And how is that something that you can find enjoyable? And I always tell people that it has never fallen short on me. The experience of being with someone in those last few moments when they take their last few breaths, and what an honor and an intimate experience that is. The energy in the room shifts. It becomes so quiet often and very peaceful. And when family members can be open to that experience, I think that they can see that it can be just a really beautiful experience for both, and it doesn't have to be scary. So that would be, I think one of the things that I try to let people know is that death doesn't have to be a scary thing. It can be welcomed and really beautiful. And yeah.
I just love that. That's a beautiful note to sort of wind things up. So we're just going to finish up with, what's the best thing that's happened to you today or this week?
Gosh, well, this week has been beautiful here in Canada. It has been almost 20 degrees every day. So the flowers are out, the grass is green. I haven't liked is that I've had to cut my grass twice already in the past week. So that's not been great. But summer is coming. And I think after the last year and a bit that we've all experienced, the longer days and the sunshine is just good for the soul.
Yeah, great. And we're moving into winter, so I wish you well with your spring and summer. Yeah, it's the opposite here. It's starting to get a wee bit chilly.
I forgot. I'm sorry. That's rubbing it in a little bit.
No. So what do you do when your day turns to custard, when things go wrong and you need to get yourself back on track? What's your number one go-to?
Well, I give a lot of not speeches, but presentations, particularly to our frontline staff on self-care and mindfulness and journaling. And so for me, I really try to go back and just have quiet time with myself. And that doesn't always mean meditating or doing all the things. It can often just mean, just sitting in quiet with a cup of tea. I try to ground and recenter myself, become focused. I do that whenever I can. I think if there was something tangible, I would say I have 2 rescue dogs. And as much as I love my husband and I know he loves me, the love that you get from an animal is like no other. And they greet me when I come home every day like it's the first day we've ever met, and they're 6 years old. So they always put a smile on my face at the end of any awful day. I know that I'm going home to 2 people who are going to be happier than anyone else in my day was to see me.
Oh, that's beautiful. That unconditional love that you get from animals, nothing compares to it, because they just love you as you are. Okay, so what are your 3 takeaways that you would like to leave with our listeners?
I think for family members, my takeaway would be, again, I sound like a broken record. Please just don't wait to have those difficult conversations. They don't need to be difficult. They can be, easy conversations that you just start with a loved one. I know my mom has started that with me about, certain things that she wants, and try not to resist the desire to say, we'll talk about that another time. Just lean in and have those conversations. I think if you are loving someone right now who is started their journey, know that this is just the beginning of the next chapter, not the end of it for them, but to give yourself grace to, like I said, just embrace all the emotions that are going to come up and know that that's normal. And if you're a friend of someone who's lost someone, know that you don't have to find all the right words. Often just being in their presence and being quiet is enough. And to know that someone's, got your back, I think is a big thing. And finally, I would say is to not be afraid to ask for help. I see a lot of families suffer after the death of a loved one, feeling like they should just get over it, particularly when it's an elderly person, that they are feeling that people are telling them they're grieving for too long. Like, what did you expect? They were 90. They were going to die at some point. Get over it. And, I'm quite bothered when I hear that, because I think that we should all be entitled to grieve in our own way. And grief does not have a timeline. It is what it is. And you have to just be open to allow it to be yours and only yours. And if you share that, it is an honor with whomever you've shared it with. It is not something that should be expected. So just if you're struggling, to know that it's okay and to ask for help if you need it. And, to let family members know that their loved one mattered to other people. And it's okay to grieve in front of a family member, because I think it can also be very therapeutic for them to see that that loss is being felt by other people and not just them, who truly, is feeling the void of that person being gone. And it's just such a passion of mine to help people to have a journey that is meaningful and theirs and unique and respectful, that I, could talk all day about it. So thank you for also giving me the opportunity to do.
You're talking about the role of the caregivers that have perhaps been with an aged parent or relative for quite some time, and so they're going to feel that same experience in losing that person.
Yeah, well, I think it's we have this philosophy called person-centered care, and it's not that. In our homes, our careers truly care for the residents like they are their family members, and they feel that loss when they're gone. And this is something that a lot of our care providers struggle with and ask me, is it okay for me to cry in front of a family member? And I always tell them, of course it is, because it can be very helpful for a family member, as I said, to see that the grief for their loved one extends beyond just them, and that other people are really feeling this profound loss of this individual, and that shared grief often helps to move people through a really difficult time, or initially when it happens, to be able to see that these people really truly loved someone that is part of your family or someone you cherish. It can be helpful to know that others are also grieving.
Ah, beautiful takeaways. And I know that you have a special offer for anyone who's listening who may feel like they want to reach out and connect with you or your resources. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I have my own company, and I am happy to talk to anyone who is one of your listeners who maybe just wants more information on a specific area that we, didn't elaborate on, or has a maybe specific situation and they'd like a little bit more information. I'm happy if they want to reach out to me. I think that you're going to include my website in the episode notes, but it's curiouswithac consulting.ca. I'm in Canada. And if people reach out and they want to book 45 or 60 minute, I'm not great at watching the clock. So really it's just a call. I'm happy to chat. And again, I can make the resource of the end of life discussions available to any of your listeners.
Okay. And is there any charge for that initial call?
No.
That is fantastic. What a really special offer that is, Michele. And thank you for all the gold nuggets that you've shared with us with your experiences in palliative care and end-of-life care. They are so, so valuable. And I think there is somebody out there listening today who will have a different take. Maybe they're right in that situation now, and that will help guide them through this process. So I'm very, very grateful for the time you've shared with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode today, feel free to share it with others. Hit the subscribe button so you can be notified of each weekly episode. Also, rate and review, especially if there is more you want to know that perhaps we didn't have time to touch on today. And if you are after resources to help you out on this journey, head to healingtobeYou.com and check those out there. So until next time, be kind to you, and thank you for joining us on the beautiful side of grief.